I was looking through some complaints today when I saw one that made me chuckle. Debbie, is this for real? You know April Fool's isn't for 3 months, right? The list had the usual things: people getting their food stolen by wildlife, guests losing things on the trail, guests losing people on the trail that usually showed up about the time we went to serve the complaint, and one that stood above the rest. January 25th, guest at Hetero Campsite reported someone driving some sort of vehicle, possibly an ATV or a Land Cruiser, late at night. When they went to confront the driver, who was getting close to a tent where they had 2 small children, they discovered what appeared to be an older model ATV driving through the woods with no driver. No, I don't think so. The lady who called it in last night sounded really upset about it. You're serious. This lady thinks she saw an ATV with no one riding it. That's what she said, Debbie said, cleaning up as she tried to get out the door. She called back about an hour ago to see if anybody was coming out to check on it. I sighed. It was probably just campers who had tipped the bottle a little too much before turning in. I cursed the fact that I was the only one on today. We were always short-staffed these days. It would be another day of talking to people who would insist what they saw was real and yell at me for not doing anything more than taking notes. Still, it would probably prove to be over quickly, so I headed to the Hetero Campsite. I wanted to get this one out of the way, having no idea what I was getting into. The woman, Mrs. Rast, did have 2 small children, a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and she also had a half-full bottle of wine that seemed to be more important at the time. She had set up a little tent near the corner of the site, and the cooler of food she had by the flap was likely going to lead to her next report being for a bear encounter. Mrs. Rast looked well enough, her children looking a little dirty, but not malnourished, but I suspected that she might be living rough while the weather was nice. She wouldn't be here much longer, not if that cold front came through like it was supposed to, and I wondered how well her ghost ATV would run in the cold. I was just setting in, the babies were sleeping, and all of a sudden I hear some kind of engine coming up through the brush. I sat up pretty quick because, for one, it was about 2 in the morning, and for 2, it was getting awful close to the tent. And if some fool was driving on a scooter or something in the dark, they might hit my tent and hurt somebody. So I went out to holler at 'em, and that's when I saw it. It was a white ATV, blue and red stripes up the side, and as it sped by, I saw that no one was riding on it. It went off into the woods, pretty as you please, and just kept going. That's when you called the ranger station, I asked, making notes and trying to ignore the strong smell of wine on her breath. Of course. Who else would I call out here in the woods? Smokey the Bear? I stifled a laugh. She wasn't wrong. Thank you very much, ma'am. We'll look into it. The woman thanked me and said that she would call if she had anything else happen. I spent the rest of the day looking into the other calls, and when I finally got back to the station, the lettuce on my BLT was wilted, and my hash browns had become distinctly soggy. I was munching on my BT, minus the L, when Ranger Forrest came in. Ranger Forrest had been doing this for about 5 years longer than me, and had heard all the jokes about a park ranger named Forrest. He looked at the limp lettuce on the napkin on my desk and picked up a bit to take a bite. He made a face. Past its prime, to be sure, but it ought to be a crime to eat a BLT without lettuce. You can take it up with the Phantom ATV, I guess. It started all this today. Ranger Forrest let the lettuce fall back on the paper towel, looking like he'd seen a ghost. What did it look like? He asked, trying to make his face look normal again and failing. Well, I didn't see it, personally, but the lady said it was white with a red and blue stripe on it. He just stood there for a second, and when I shook him, he seemed to come back to himself. You okay? What happened there? Where was it? What? The ATV? I said, almost laughing. His eyes were deadly serious when he asked me again. Where did you see it? By the Hetero campsite. Forrest, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I didn't, he hedged, but maybe she did. He took a seat, picking up another piece of the wilted lettuce and nibbled at it. You gonna tell me what you mean, or am I gonna have to guess? He let me sit for a few more seconds before he started his story. About 3 years ago, I got a call to go check on an ATV accident near the Hetero site. Some kids had driven their ATVs into the park, coming up some kind of back trail to get there, and one of them had been hot-dogging and gotten himself hurt real bad. Well, it's not entirely accurate. The kid had gotten himself real dead. He'd been driving too fast and gone under a tree, and it had taken his head clean off. He had never seen it coming, apparently, and he'd been going fast enough that it snapped his neck and lopped his head off. His friends were standing around looking pale and embarrassed to be anywhere near those vehicles. I remember to this day that the kid's eyes were still moving when I got there. His head was off, his blood making a streak on the side of the ATV, and his eyes were still tracking like he could see us. He focused on me when I got close, his eyes seeming to beg me to fix him, and then they stopped. It's the ATV that I remember too, though. It was white with a blue streak, and his blood seemed to make another one below that, a long red one. I'll never forget that, loading that bike into the back of the police trailer and seeing the blood flake off as it bumped the side. I didn't say anything for a minute, just watched him sit there and chew cud before reading him the description of the bike. The lady thought it might just be a regular red streak, but I didn't see it, and she saw it on the move, so she could be wrong. The one thing she was clear about was that no one was riding it. Forrest nodded. Well, it would be hard to drive one without a head, I guess. We talked a little more before he said he needed to get back to work. I had a small mountain of paperwork to handle, and by the time I looked up, it was dark out. I checked my watch and found that it was only 7, but it was the right time of year for an early evening. I had just bent back to my work, wondering when my relief was going to get there, when I heard something come over the radio. It made me jump a little. It had been so quiet up until that point. And when they hailed the station again, I walked over to the handset and picked it up. Base 3 here, go ahead. We have a call about the Hetero camp. Something about an illegal vehicle near the site. Would you go take a look? Roger, I'll head out there. Touch base with Ranger Forrest and see if he's in the area. I might need help. The dispatcher said that they would, and I grabbed my radio and headed for my own vehicle, my sturdy little Bobcat. I shivered as I set out, feeling the chill as it hit against my jacket and wishing I had put on my earmuffs. It was chilly enough for snow, and I was glad that I didn't have to deal with any of that. As I came up the service road towards the campsite, I could hear something racing along, but it could have been from an ATV or a dirt bike. As I got closer, I could see people coming out of their tents to look at it, and Mrs. Rast was in attendance with her 2 kids. Whatever it was racing along the tree line beside the campground, and it was going full throttle at a suicidal rate. It started about a half an hour ago, Mrs. Rast said, running up when she saw me pull up. If it's someone out there, they're going to get killed if they keep running like that. As she said it, the engine suddenly died, and whatever had been driving out there stopped. Everyone, stay with your tents. Don't leave the area. I'm going to go see if I can find the driver, but I don't want anyone to get hurt if they start hot rodding again. They made non-committal noises, and most of them went back to their tents. I dug my mag light out of my supply hatch and walked into the copse of trees. The trees were thin enough that I should be able to see if someone was back there, especially if they were on a vehicle of some kind. It was dark, but there was enough light out here that visibility was pretty good. The flashlight hit the pathetic line of trees, showing me a bunch of scrub pines and thin oaks, but no ATV or rider. There was little and less to go on here, and I was ready to give up when I heard something come to life to my left. I was suddenly in the yellow headlights of an ancient ATV, the paint job looking more yellow than white. The blue stripe was a light blue, very cheery, but the other stripe was no more than a faded red and brown. I saw all of this in a split second, right before it came barreling towards me. I jumped out of the way, barely avoided being struck, and when it rolled off into the woods, I heard a gasp and was blinded by the beam of a flashlight. Forrest moved the light a moment later, and he was white as a sheet. That's the one. The very same ATV. I can't believe it. I just can't believe it. We walked back to our bobcats, me holding him up a little as we went. He took a week off after that, said he needed to clear his head. I picked up the slack, understanding how these kinds of things can get to you. Moths, trains, lighthouses, and now phantom ATVs. What is this place coming to? You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.